Chris Mackowski for the American Battlefield Trust, and I am standing on a beautiful day on the Brandy Station battlefield, and we are glad to have you with us to commemorate the 160th anniversary of the war's largest cavalry battle. This is the opening action of the Gettysburg Campaign, and we've got Dan Davis, we've got Greg Mertz. We're going to come on here, talk a little bit about the action here, and set the stage for us. Behind the camera, we have Professor Andy Poulton. Thank you so much for the work you're doing back there for us to make us all look good today, Andy. We want to encourage you to go check out our Chancellorsville coverage. We spent a lot of time exploring the Chancellorsville campaign. And in the wake of that campaign, both commanders, Joseph Hooker for the North, Robert E. Lee for the South, are making some important decisions about what to do next. That was a tough battle at Chancellorsville. Both armies are spoiling for a fight. Robert E. Lee not necessarily looking to head back into action, but he's got a lot of other considerations to consider as well. Of course, we all consider considerations, right? One of the things that he's facing pressure on is Ulysses S. Grant out in the West. Grant is moving through Mississippi. He's been closing in on Vicksburg. He's starting to strangle the Gibraltar of the Mississippi out there. And as a result, Jefferson Davis has been considering maybe sending portions of Lee's army out there. Lee says, no, if you do that, I'm gonna have to fall back into the defenses around Richmond. And I don't know if we can handle a siege here in Virginia. And so Davis says, okay, well, what are our other options? And that's gonna cook up the idea of striking north with the Army of Northern Virginia into Pennsylvania, and hopefully then creating enough of a panic, creating enough of a craze to shift troops from to shift Union troops from Mississippi to the east to try to alleviate that threat. And so that's kind of what Lee is hoping for, as he's going to set the stage here for what becomes the Gettysburg Campaign. He knows he's going to strike north toward Harrisburg, an important rail junction, important supply junction. You might be able to hear he's sending out his scouts by air to check out what the routes of march are going to be. And so that's kind of what Lee's thinking. Northward as a way to keep his army together, because he doesn't want to send portions away, and to alleviate pressure that Grant is exerting out west. Meanwhile, Joe Hooker, really smarting from his loss at Chancellorsville, trying to figure out what to do next. A lot of people think he gets canned right away, but in fact he doesn't. But he does have his organizational access shifted around a little bit. He's got corps commanders that are fleeing, refusing to work for him. He's got his direct line to Abraham Lincoln basically cut off, and he's got to report to a man he hates, and that's General-in-Chief Henry Halleck. And so that's going to create lots of stresses. And he's also told he's got to keep himself between Robert E. Lee and Washington, D.C., excuse me, because I'm thinking ahead toward Richmond, because that's what Hooker wants to do. He wants to strike south toward the Confederate capital, and Lincoln's like, no, you've got to protect the capital. So all of these factors are really making things difficult for Hooker as he's trying to decide what he wants to do and how to respond, what his next move is. As a result, he's kind of frozen into place, stymied. It's within this context, as both of these armies are trying to figure out their next move, that this battle is going to take place as an opening move in what becomes that Gettysburg Campaign, as the cavalry for both sides trying to get reorganized, get refit after the winners, trying to re-identify themselves, as we'll discover with the Union Army in particular. And to talk a little bit about that and how things get going here, I want to bring on my good friend and mentor, Greg Mertz. Greg is with the Brandy Station Foundation. He knows a lot about this field, and he has done a lot to help me in my career, so it's a pleasure to be out on the field with you today, Greg.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great being here. The Battle of Brandy Station is noted as the largest cavalry battle of the Civil War, and some that have compared it to other actions say it's the largest cavalry battle ever fought in the Western Hemisphere. And there's a good reason why it takes about the 2-year point of the American Civil War to reach a point where you can have a large cavalry battle. Any earlier than Joseph Hooker taking command of the Union Army of the Potomac, there would not have been an opportunity for the Union Army to mass a large number of cavalry. The cavalry was spread out throughout the army without a single person able to bring them all together for a single battle. The United States Army actually began early on in the war with a rather negative attitude in many respects toward the Union cavalry. It was felt that to take a green soldier that had never ridden a horse before and trained to become a cavalryman would take a year. And when the war broke out, it was thought that the American Civil War would not last a year. And so many units that were early on recruited for cavalry units in the Union Army were actually converted into infantry, where the learning curve was thought to be not quite as steep. When Joseph Hooker took command of the Army again in January of 1863, he decided that he wanted to have a cavalry force that was superior to the Confederates. And the first step is to bring everyone together. So all these units that had been spread out and maybe not used very wisely by infantry commanders who might use the cavalry as couriers, as escorts for generals, maybe have them guard pontoon bridges or supply trains or things like that. Let's bring them all together and let's start asking them to do some of the unique assignments for cavalry, namely to try to scout out the enemy, figure out what they're doing, and likewise to screen the enemy from finding out what you're doing. And so very early on, Joseph Hooker put his cavalry in a screen all around the army. He would also eventually utilize them in the Chancellorsville campaign for a raid to try to cut Confederate supply lines. So he'd have a battle known as Kelly's Ford, also here in Culpeper County. At the time, it's said that that was the largest cavalry battle of the war, even though there were only around 3,000 cavalrymen, or at least the largest one east of the Mississippi, involving only around 3,000 cavalrymen. But here now, on the eve of the Gettysburg Campaign, Joseph Hooker's men are scouting in this area and realize that there's a Confederate cavalry buildup here. Union Army doesn't know exactly why, but they figure that it can't be for any good reason. They feel that the Confederates are probably planning some kind of a raid on their own line. And so Joseph Hooker turns to his cavalry corps commander, who's now Alfred Pleasanton. This is going to be his first campaign as a cavalry corps commander. He wants him to seek out and destroy the Confederates here, to break up a raid in its incipience, in his own words. Now, why were the Confederates out here in large numbers? Mentioned before, the Union Army had never had the ability until Joseph Hooker took command to mass their troops all together. Confederates had massed their cavalry together since October of 1861, but there's even more cavalrymen out here than they'd ever had before, in part because, as Chris mentioned, they are planning to go up into Pennsylvania for what we know of as the Gettysburg Campaign, going into unfamiliar and unfriendly territory. So since an important role of the cavalry is to scout out the enemy, Robert E. Lee is going to be relying on his cavalry more than ever before in going up into Pennsylvania. So the units of the 5 brigades that are here, the units that most typically have fought with the cavalry commander, Jeb Stuart, is Rooney Lee's brigade, Fitzhugh Lee's brigade, and Hampton's brigade. Adding to that, we're bringing up a new brigade of some North Carolina troops from North Carolina under Beverly Robertson, and a unit that has fought some with Stuart before, was missing during the Chancellorsville campaign because it was going on a raid into West Virginia along with John M. Bowdoin, but that is William E. Grumble Jones. So all 5 of those cavalry brigades are massed here, along with the horse artillery. Some 9,500 Confederate cavalrymen are in this area. The Union Army, their strength, by the way, cavalrymen that are going to come here number around 8,000. And because the Cavalry Corps is still new, we think that Joseph Hooker believes they might need some extra strength. They might need some of the typical fighting troops, might need some infantry. So handpicked are some of the best infantry commands noted for their marching, best able to keep up with the cavalry. So some 3,000 infantrymen out here. So all in all, some 17,000 Union cavalry, making this the largest cavalry battle of the war. But it's not a pure cavalry battle because the Union Army will have there some 3,000 infantrymen. Now, in the days leading up to the battle, including the actually day before, the Confederates have a review. And with this review, one of the things the Confederates are also doing is kind of pulling in their most extreme outposts. That enables the Union Army to get a little bit closer look at the Confederates than they might before. And as mentioned, we know the Union Army knows Confederate horsemen are nearby. What they don't actually realize is that they have moved from the point of the review up closer to the Rappahannock River on the very eve of the battle. So the action's going to get started in the ground right in front of you. If you look across this field, you'll notice that before you get to the heavy tree line that there is a lighter, lower tree line right along a fence row. That is along what is known as the Beverly's Ford Road. Beverly's Ford is just out of your sight, further on off to the left. And Beverly's Ford is a crossing of the Rappahannock River. There's a dam nearby, so if you're at the river, you can hear the rumbling of the water, which would kind of hamper some of the soldiers' ability to hear exactly what was going on. But posted right at the river were a pair of cousins. Their last names were James. And as they're sitting there listening for any potential Union activity, one of the horse's ears kind of twitched. And the riders kind of realized that the horse was sensing that something was wrong. On the other side of the river, camped all night, silent, no fires lit, not even a match to be lit, were the Union soldiers waiting for 4:30 in the morning to come the appointed time when they would cross over the river. So at that point, a portion of the Union Army under John Buford, there are two wings, one crossing at Beverly's Ford, another that would cross about 6 or 7 miles further downstream at Kelly's Ford, but two wings to cross over and converge in the community of Brandy Station. From there, they thought they could go on to where the Confederates were last known to be at the point where they had their cavalry review, a place known as Inlet Station. So that's the plan. So as the Union Army does cross the river at 4:30 in the morning, the James cousins go back to their picket post. These are men waiting their turn to be on the front line. If you're on that front line, on the picket line, the extreme outskirts, you have to be fresh, you have to be alert. You're only doing that for a matter of up to 2 hours at a time when someone else is going to come relieve you. So the men that are waiting for their turn to be on the front line are warned that the Union Army is coming across. Their captain, Bruce Gibson, says, keep cool, men, and shoot to kill. But with that, the Battle of Brandy Station is underway, and Dan Davis will kind of pick the story up from there. But I've been asked just to say a few words about what the Brandy Station Foundation will be doing during the anniversary of the battle. On Friday, June 9th, Saturday, June 10th, and Sunday, June 11th, activities will be going on out here, sponsored both by the Brandy Station Foundation and by Culpeper Battlefield Tours. The foundation will have our graffiti house open 3 hours on Friday afternoon and 3 hours on Sunday afternoon and 4 hours on Saturday afternoon. The graffiti house is a Civil War era building where both Union and Confederate soldiers have written their names, messages, sketches, and the like, and a lot of the sketches and so forth in there by the Confederates are done by men from Grumble Jones's Confederate Brigade, for those specifically interested in the cavalry. We'll also have some living history on on Saturday and Sunday from the 124th New York, one of those hand-picked Union infantry regiments that accompany the Army because they're, again, known for their marching skills. And on Saturday evening at 5:30 in the Brandy Station Fire Hall, we've invited Professor Gary Gallagher, who's recently retired from the University of Virginia, to come and speak. Excellent speaker in the academic world. I don't know if there's anybody on par with him in reaching out and connecting with the public. So I hope you join us for that. But for now, Dan is going to pick up where I left off with the Union Army cutting across at Beverly Ford.
Thank you, Greg. And hey there, everyone. And I'll also tag on to what Greg said. Our friends at Culpeper Battlefield Tours are sponsoring a reenactment here to commemorate the 160th anniversary of the battle. There will be real-time tours on Friday, June 9th, followed by the reenactment on Saturday, June 10th, and then Sunday, June 11th. So if you're watching these videos, if you're in the area, if you're close by, come on out to Brandy Station. I know as Greg mentioned, there's a lot of great events planned. Now, as Greg mentioned, John Buford's wing is going to be coming across the Rappahannock at Beverly's Ford. Leading that advance is a fellow named Benjamin Grimes Davis. He's a former regular Army officer. He's leading Buford's troopers over Beverly's Ford, and his old regiment, the 8th New York Cavalry, is riding at the head of Buford's column. And the first casualty of the Gettysburg Campaign is going to come from the 8th New York Cavalry. Company B, Lieutenant Henry Cutler, an officer, is going to be killed roughly where the modern Beverly's Ford Road ends today, just over my left shoulder. Grimes Davis is going to lead his men forward through the pickets of the 6th Virginia Cavalry, but at the same time, he's going to stir up a hornet's nest. He's poked the sleeping bear, if you will. More regiments are going to respond as the Federals begin pushing up Beverly's Ford Road to where we are now standing. Those regiments are the rest of the 6th Virginia Cavalry and the 7th Virginia Cavalry from Grumble Jones's brigade. They've camped that night near St. James Church, where we will be visiting later on in one of our other videos. As Davis is riding up the Beverly's Ford Road, he's going to collide with those 2 Virginia regiments. The 8th New York, again at the head of the column, is going to recoil. Davis, riding out in front of his men, he sees his men sort of recoil against the initial Confederate attack. He's going to turn around, ride back to them, and yell at the top of his lungs, "Stand firm, 8th New York." And at that very moment that he utters those words, he's going to sense a presence coming up behind him. He's going to turn around, swing his saber in defense, but the officer who came up behind him is a Confederate, Lieutenant Robert Allen of the 6th Virginia. Allen is going to duck Davis's saber thrust, and then he's going to shoot Davis in the head with his pistol. Davis is going to be dead before he hits the ground. And when Davis falls, that's when the Union advance is really going to begin to lose its steam. The next regiment coming up, the 8th Illinois Cavalry, is also going to run into those Virginians along the Beverly's Ford Road. There's going to be fighting in the fields out here behind me and on the opposite side of the road as the Federal attack is eventually going to lose steam. Davis's death is going to be reported back across the river to John Buford, and that's when Buford himself is going to ride over to assess the situation here on the field. And in his report, Buford is going to write of Grimes Davis, and I think this is one of my favorite quotes from the American Civil War. He's speaking of Davis. He died in the front, giving examples of heroism and courage to all who were to follow. He was a thorough soldier, free from politics and intrigue, a patriot in its true sense, an ornament to his country, and a bright star to his profession. So we can see that Davis is well thought of by his superiors, especially John Buford. Now, as the attack again has lost steam, Jeb Stuart is going to begin pulling the Confederate horse artillery, 4 batteries of Confederate horse artillery that were camped here the night before, back toward the ridge at St. James Church. Again, we're going to visit that location in another video. The horse artillery is commanded by a fellow named Robert Beckham. He's a major. He has succeeded John Pelham, who was killed just months earlier at Kelly's Ford, and he's also a Culpeper native. And Beckham is going to, I think, and we'll talk about this more later on, he's going to do a masterful job of directing his guns through the course of the fighting here at Brandy Station on June 9th, 1863. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris Mackowski.
So we have so much more coverage to come today with some great videos from all across this battlefield. The Brandy Station Foundation has lots going on to commemorate the anniversary. And of course, we want you to come out here yourself and explore. This is a battlefield that's been made possible largely in part because of your support for battlefield preservation. That's why we're able to come out here, because you've helped set this land aside. And we'll give a shout out to our friend Bud Hall, who's been very instrumental in a lot of that behind the scenes. Come explore this battlefield for yourself. Stay with us today. Support the Brandy Station Foundation. And of course, just keep tuned to all the great resources we have at battlefields.org so that you can explore the Civil War from the comfort of your own living room. For Greg Mertz, Dan Davis, Andy Polton, I'm Chris Mackowski. Thanks for everything you do to support battlefield preservation and and education.